Good afternoon. We want to thank you for coming to Loma Linda University Church to bear witness to a wonderful encore presentation of the history of Loma Linda University Church. Friends, I believe with all my heart that our history sets the trajectory of our church in the future. And when you see the role we have played in the mission of Jesus Christ here on campus, we continue to play that role and to carry on that mission into the future. We're so glad that you're here. We're hoping many of our friends are viewing in at home. We'd like to ask the Lord to be with us today. Father in heaven, thank you for your love and for how you have revealed yourself through this institution, this body of Christ. Lord, I ask that you will inspire us, that we might carry on that torch into the future for generations to come. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm so delighted to introduce my dear friend and Pastor Marvin Ponder.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for coming out this evening. I want to begin by stating right up front that I'm not a historian. There are many other people in this community who have done more careful research and have done more extensive study in the history of Loma Linda. People like Richard Schaefer, who I believe is the official historian for the university and the medical center. This presentation that I'm giving today started out as to be a project of just my own personal interest. And just about 6 months before I retired in June of 2015, I presented this to our staff worship one morning, or at least a portion of it. And the staff felt that it was something that should be shared with a larger church family. So at camp meeting time this past summer, I made this presentation. I'd be curious to know how many of you were at that presentation in the summer. Okay, oh my goodness. Quite a few of you. You've come back for a second dose? It's essentially going to be the same program that we did this summer. But I hope that you don't think this is going to be kind of a multimedia presentation. It's going to be more like we are sitting in our living room on Sabbath afternoon looking at pictures together. And so it'll be a very informal presentation. It will not be an extensive history of Loma Linda, because that would be too much ground to try to cover in one afternoon. The specific purpose of this presentation is to trace the history of the church in Loma Linda. I think it's helpful for us to occasionally stop and take a look at where we came from and to revisit the decisions that were made at each stage of our development that have made us what we are up to this present moment. And hopefully it can give us some perspective and inform us as to the future steps that we should take as a church family. One disclaimer, I could not include everything, and there were some things in some eras where I had very difficult time finding pictures. So if we can have the lights now, we're going to begin. And I'll just sit up here on the stool. In the year 1904, Ellen White instructed John Burden, who was the manager of the St. Helena Sanitarium at that time, to come to Southern California to look between Riverside, San Bernardino, and Redlands for a piece of property which she had seen in vision. I'm wondering if we could have the lights dimmed, please. It's going to be hard to see these pictures without. Okay, thank you. And I've got plenty of light here on the stand, so I don't need the stage lights unless you want them there. I just want the picture to show up as best as possible. Some of these are old pictures, and so they're hard to see, some of them. In March of 1904, Burden found this property, 76 acres. Four miles from Redlands, and when John Burden walked this property and reported back to Ellen White, she believed that this was a property that had matched her description that she had seen. Actually, this next picture was taken sometime later, around 1921, but I wanted you to see this aerial view of the entire property. 35 of the 76 acres formed a hill. I'm going to try to use my pointer here. I'm not sure where it is. It's not working. Oh, there it is. Oh, sorry. 35 acres of the 76 acres formed the hill, which is hard to see in this aerial view, which rose 125 feet above the valley floor. John Burden learned that the facilities on this property had been built in the 1880s by land developers, land speculators, or boomers they were called, those who built boom towns in the West. The speculators had named the proposed resort community Mound City Villa or Mound City Hotel, but they went bankrupt, and then they sold out to a group of 80 physicians and 40 businessmen from Los Angeles who wanted to develop Mound City into a health resort. The new owners renamed the property Loma Linda, the beautiful hill. And they invested over $155,000 in new buildings, furnishings, and other improvements. But their efforts failed, and the stockholders were desperate to unload this property. On the summit of the hill were several cottages, a large recreational hall, and of course a plush 4-story, 64-room hotel that stood above the trees on the most prominent point of the hill. You can see in that circle the top of the hotel sticking out above the trees. The hotel was in excellent condition with electric lights, and it was heated with steam. Water was piped in from a large artesian well. For months, Loma Linda was deserted, except for a caretaker and grazing cattle there in the pasture there in front of the hotel. People in the surrounding community nicknamed the hill Lonesome Linda because nobody was here but the cattle. Burden was told that the $155,000 property could be purchased for $110,000, but that was out of the question for this small group of Adventist believers to purchase, so he left town. But a little later, Ellen White urged him to return. This time, the price would lower to $85,000, but it was still too much for the 1,400 members of the Southern California Conference to support. So again, Burden left empty-handed. But Mrs. White urged Burden to return to Loma Linda a third time. This time, John Burden asked the owners if they were really serious about selling Loma Linda and what would be the bottom dollar price that they would accept. They said they would settle for $40,000. So Burden decided to buy the property after consulting with Ellen White. This was a very courageous act to step out in faith the way they did. And the details of how that purchase came about are nothing short of miraculous. In less than 6 months, they had raised the funds, and the final purchase price for Loma Linda was $38,900. Now, interestingly enough, the stairway that you see here and in the previous pictures of the hotel is the one that the Loma Linda University volunteers were attempting to uncover last May. You remember hearing about that? Dr. Hart led a Sunday archaeological dig with volunteers coming out on Sunday morning to try to see what they could find in that old stairway. Of course, the wooden stairs have long since disintegrated, but they did find some relics, a few relics, remnants of the fountain that you see there in the middle of the picture, the pool. In November of 1905, the Loma Linda Sanitarium and School of Nursing opened with 35 sanitarium employees, including physicians and nurses. The next year, 1906, Ellen White again emphasized that Loma Linda was not only to be a sanitarium, but an educational institution. So later that year, the Loma Linda College of Evangelists opened with a 3-year evangelistic medical course to train students to be medical missionaries and gospel workers. And 3 years later, 1909, the school's name was changed to the College of Medical Evangelists, or CME, as it came to be known. And they became an official school of medicine. Now, this next picture shows the sanitarium in the background looking south from what is now Anderson Street. And you can see in the distance there the railroad crossing that stood near the foot of the stairway that led up to the sanitarium. The South Pacific Railway Station was right in front of the sanitarium, and the main line of the South Pacific Railroad ran right through the Loma Linda property. There's a picture of the old station, and here's another one that's a little older that shows the buggies parked off to the side and the train on the right-hand side. Here are a couple of pictures looking a little further back, looking south toward the sanitarium through the entrance columns of the sanitarium. This was Pepper Street at the time, later becoming Anderson Street. You can't see it in the picture, but the caption on the entrance columns reads, "Looking south toward the everlasting hills." The first Seventh-day Adventist church in Loma Linda was organized January 6, 1906, with 16 charter members, and Elder John Burden was their first pastor. They first met in the parlor of the old sanitarium. Here's a picture of one of the earliest worship services of this newly formed church. Years later, Elder F.D. Nickel, who was one of our well-known church leaders and Review and Herald editors, said that when they organized this group of 16 charter members, he was an 8-year-old boy and in this early congregation, but he was too young to join the church. Therefore, he was too young to be listed as one of the charter members. But he was an 8-year-old boy in this congregation at that time. So this was the first church in Loma Linda. I was amazed when I found this picture at the clarity of the picture to be as old as it is. It's amazing, isn't it? One of the things I've become aware of in studying this early history is how integrated the life of the church was with the life of the sanitarium and the hospital and the college. there wasn't the separation of institutions in those early days that we have experienced in more current times. For example, Elder John Burden, who was the pastor of the church, was also the Bible teacher in this newly formed school. It wasn't long before the sanitarium parlor area became too small for the membership to meet in for worship. So they moved the congregation to one of the outlying buildings on the property called the Assembly Hall. It was also known as the log cabin. This log cabin church was located on the crest of the hill where the present-day Nickel Hall lobby is located. This building was one of the original buildings on the sanitarium grounds. It was used as a recreational hall, a recreational building. Before the Adventists purchased it, it had been a bowling alley in the Mound City Resort. This original church building came to be known as the Church on the Hill. But it soon became too small for the congregation. Finally, in 1910, as the membership continued to grow, CME asked Mr. Fred Drake to design and build a new church building, and they called it the Chapel on the Hill. It was built on the northwest slope of the hill where the present-day Women's Residence Hall, Kate Lindsay Hall, is located. The outside of the chapel was painted green, and so it also came to be known as the Little Green Chapel. Here is a view of the belfry of the little chapel, just peeking out from the tops of the trees, looking toward the Loma Linda Hills, toward Riverside. Notice how there's nothing but orange groves as far as you can see. To help fund this new chapel, the sanitarium deducted pledges from their workers' pay. And to raise money for the new opera seats, they were called, for the chapel, members were encouraged to buy from 1 to a dozen of the new seats for $2 each. Because of the shortage of housing at the School of Medicine, student physicians lived up in the chapel belfry. John Burden referred to these medical students living in the belfry as the church mice. Here's a picture of the interior of the chapel on the hill. It was a fan-shaped building with the rostrum in one corner and the seats fanned out from there. The seating capacity of the chapel was 750. There were 2 balconies, one on either side, and if you look carefully in the edges of the picture, you can see just a portion of the balcony in the edge of the picture. This chapel was declared by many to be large enough for any future needs we might have, including graduation exercises. In fact, this is a picture of one of the early School of Nursing graduation services. Elder W.W. Rubel is standing at the pulpit preaching. When Ellen White visited this chapel, she commended the church members on their lovely new chapel, but she ended her remarks by saying, "But it isn't half large enough. You people have no idea what this place will become if you remain faithful." And of course, 11 years later, the need for expansion was acute. As a temporary measure, the college-age young people were asked to conduct a separate Sabbath school back at the Assembly Hall where they had met before. But upon returning for worship services, many of them were turned away, even though folding chairs filled every possible place. During the first 2 decades of meeting in this building, the church experienced challenges typical of life in the 20th century. For example, at one point in 1916, the janitor was instructed to stop oiling the floors, which was a common practice in those days to protect the wood floors. But as the worshipers would kneel to pray on Sabbath morning, their knees and their clothes were being stained by the oil on the floor. So they were using the hymnals to protect their knees. At another point, the church set up a new committee. You know, we as Adventists from the very beginning have loved committees. The church set up a new committee called the Fly Committee, which was set up to solve the problem of common houseflies in the worship service. And the Fly Committee came forward with two recommendations. Number one, the church should have screens put on all the windows and doors to keep the flies out. And secondly, install hitching posts at the foot of the hill so that the horses would not be hitched too close to the church and draw flies. The water that filled the baptistry in this church was often muddy water that was being piped down from Big Bear Lake and sometimes contained small fish, which made for some interesting baptisms. But later on, in April of 1923, the church board negotiated with CME to receive water from the School of Medicine. Around 1926, the growing congregation was quickly outgrowing this facility that was designed for 750 people. The chapel became so crowded that public address speakers were installed on the sanitarium grounds to accommodate the overflow audiences that sat out on the lawn listening to the services. In those early years, the church board had selected its pastors from the Bible teachers of the College of Medical Evangelists, who were paid by the college and not the conference. During those years, from 1906 to 1928, the pastors who served the church were, of course, Elder John Burden, and our second pastor was Elder R.S. Owen. And unfortunately, I couldn't find pictures for the next pastors, but in chronological order, they were Clarence Santee, Frank Berg, C.C. McReynolds, O.A. Dart, and R.S. Fries. And I'm really sorry I couldn't find their pictures. The university church, as we now know it, had its beginning when crowded conditions in the little chapel on the hill impressed the church leaders that a second church on campus was necessary. By 1928, the membership of the chapel on the hill had reached 1,026 members, almost matching the total population of the small town of Loma Linda. At that time, the local conference required that at least 100 resident members were needed in order to establish a new church so close to an existing church. So it was decided to invite the college faculty, students, staff, families, and all institutional workers who were on the college payroll to be charter members of a new congregation, which obviously had to be called the college church. Mrs. Catherine Groff, a charter member of the college church, and I might mention Catherine was still a member here at this church when I came in the late 70s. Catherine Groff said, "We left the Hill Church for two reasons. For one thing, it was very crowded. The other reason was that many of the leaders in the Hill Church had held offices for so long that they were reluctant to give up their leadership to the young, and it was felt that the students and faculty should be given a chance to be more involved in the leadership of the church." So the Loma Linda College Church was formed. And on December 29, 1928, the congregation of the college church, which is now the university church, was officially organized with 284 charter members registering. That left 680 members remaining with the church on the hill. This new congregation first met in what was the campus's largest student classroom, a 250-seat West Hall amphitheater, which was located in the building that had been the first Loma Linda hospital. This 70-bed hospital had been constructed on the lower campus in 1913, but by 1928, it was no longer being used as the hospital, and so the college was using it as a classroom building. Here's a little closer view of that same building. This was the first home of the new college church. And just so you have a context of where this was located, it was located where the current basic science building is, very near where the New World Globe Fountain is located in the quadrangle. And of course, that building has long since been demolished. Elder Taylor G. Bunch, a teacher in the religion department of the College of Medical Evangelists, became the first pastor of this newly organized church. Initially, most of the members of this newly formed church were single students, and most of them, those who were married, did not have young families yet, so there weren't many small children in the new church at first. Therefore, only one children's Sabbath school division was adequate to serve all the children. Here is a picture of the interior of the West Hall Amphitheater classroom where the members met. Looks pretty grim, doesn't it? Within months, this room was overcrowded on Sabbath morning, even though public address speakers were being used in adjoining classrooms. By the way, the flag and the room decorations in this picture were there for a memorial service that had been conducted the day before this picture was taken for a medical student who had drowned in an accident. Just to give you a context of this time period, by this time, 1928, 1929, a new hospital and sanitarium had been built on the site of the old original sanitarium building on the Hill Beautiful. You can see from this picture maybe this other one a little better. You can see a resemblance of this building to Nickel Hall. That's because this third hospital, which remained the hospital until the new medical center was built in the 60s, was then remodeled into what today is Nickel Hall. And the top story was removed in the remodeling project. In 1933, the membership of the college church had reached 350 and was now too large for the old West Hall Amphitheater, and the church needed a new home. Elder Camden Lacey, another Bible teacher on the college faculty, was now the pastor of the church. And I might just mention that both of these pioneering pastors, Taylor Bunch and Camden Lacey, were both distinguished scholars, and both were equally capable in the classroom and the pulpit. Both were primarily teachers in the Department of Religion, paid by the college and not the conference. Both had to struggle to get religion recognized as an essential and integral part of the curriculum of the CME schools, and both were faced with space problems in the church building. So it was decided under the leadership of Elder Lacey that the college church and the College of Medical Evangelists would cooperate in building a new home for the college church. And here is an artist rendering of what the new church would look like. This new church was not designed to be a dedicated sanctuary, but a multi-purpose hall to be used on Sabbath for the worship services and during the week for college chapel services, lectures, and community programs with the college. And then the college library facilities would be located on the lower floor of this building. This new building, Burden Hall, named after our first pastor, Elder John Burden, was completed at the cost of $15,000. So after 6.5 years of meeting in West Hall, the college church moved to its new home. The first church service was held in this new building, Burden Hall, on October 6, 1934. Its seating capacity of approximately 500 was none too large, for the membership had already grown to 419 during the construction period. Dr. Benton Culver donated this Estes pipe organ in order to enrich the quality of the Sabbath morning worship services at Burden Hall. Now, I'd like to just go back for a moment and recap something. When the two churches had split in 1928, and 284 members had gone to the college church, and 680 members had remained with the original church, the mother church, the chapel on the hill. But dividing the churches had not solved the problem of overcrowding in either church. So by 1935, both churches were crowded. So the church on the hill chose a new building site, not too far away from where they were, and in 1937, they built a new church to seat 1,500 people at the cost of $66,450. This new church building became known as the Church on the Hill, or the Hill Church. Eventually, in 1966, it officially changed its name to the Campus Hill Church. Now, returning to our story of the college church, Elder Varner Johns became the pastor of the college church in 1936. And Elder Johns was also a member of the Faculty of Religion at CME. Elder John's special emphasis during his pastorate was on student participation in the work of the church. Medical students were made responsible for planning Sabbath services on a regular basis, and students were sent out to many of the area churches in the valley to conduct worship services and evangelistic meetings. By the way, Elder Johns was still a member of this congregation when I came in the late 70s. He was in his 90s by then, but remained an active member of this church to the very end. During this time, attendance at the college church continued to grow so that public address speakers were necessary again. They were placed outside the church and also in Cutler Hall, that was just across the sidewalk from Burden Hall in the quadrangle. Elder Norval Pease became the pastor in 1945, and Elder Pease inaugurated an early morning preaching service preceding the Sabbath school in Burden Hall. When both services were filled to capacity and the people were again turned away, a third church service was conducted in Cutler Hall at the early hour. Finally, 4 services were being held, utilizing both Cutler and Burden Hall for the 8:15 and 11 o'clock worship services. Elder Pease's special interest was in the development and the enrichment of the service of worship, with emphasis on the communion services, church music, and the use of Scripture in the service. In later years, while teaching at the seminary, Dr. Pease wrote the first major book on the theology of Adventist worship. I was privileged to have Dr. Pease as one of my professors at the seminary in the mid-60s. And he also was a member of this church when I came in the late 70s. He had retired out here to California. By the early 1950s, the membership of the college church had grown to 1,200. Children's Sabbath schools were being staged in rooms all over the campus, including the Campus Hill Church basement, the library stacks, the men's dorm basement, Kate Lindsay Hall Chapel, amphitheaters, in the old chemistry department, in old storage buildings, in the barber shop, and even in Loma Linda Mortuary. As the inadequacy of Burden Hall became apparent, Pastor Norval Pease and the building committee initiated a fundraising campaign to enlarge and remodel Burden Hall by extending it back and adding 2 wings to either side at the cost of $175,000. It was to be a major remodeling of Burden Hall, and construction was to begin in February or March of 1953. But in January of 1953, just 1 month before they were to start building, W.P. Elliott, who was the chairman of the board of CME, was instrumental in tabling the building plans in favor of building an entirely new church. The CME board voted to reserve an area on campus for a new college church on the lower campus. And here's a picture, an aerial picture of that area. This, of course, you see in the top portion of the picture, nothing but orange groves. And this area that you see outlined was the area that was allocated for the new college church. It was on the corner of Central Avenue, which is now University Avenue, and San Bernardino Street, which is now Campus Street. It would be right across the campus from the School of Dentistry, which was in the process of being built. They were actually in kind of the final stages of construction during that time. Here's another picture of the construction of the School of Dentistry. And here's another view of the lower campus site for the new college church from a different direction. And there's the area that the new church is to be built. You can see there's the School of Dentistry that had just been constructed, and this is University Avenue, which at that time was a through street. There's McGann Hall area, which was the administration building, and I don't think Mortensen Hall or Griggs Hall had been built at that time. By 1955, this site for the new college church had been allocated, and the church board suggested that a sign be placed on the site so that people in the community would know that they were moving forward with a new church. That's Elder Teal, Pastor Charles Teal on the left, and on the right is Walter Clark and Dr. Kellen Reynolds. By February of 1956, the architects were working on sketches and plans for the new building. And of course, Elder Charles Teal had become the senior pastor of the church by this time. And here's a picture of the pastoral staff at that time. Actually, it's only part of the staff. That's Elder Earl Reynolds on the left. He's a pastor of visitation, and Merrill Enright, youth pastor. Charles Teal, senior pastor, and Pat Hicks, who was the associate minister of music. And it's missing several members of the pastoral staff at that time. Stanley Peterson, Frank Moran, Arnold Wallenkamp, and Oliver Belts all are missing from that picture. I couldn't find one of all of them. Under the leadership of Pastor Teal and that of the college president, Godfrey T. Anderson, it was soon decided that a large church building was needed to seat 1,500 to 2,000 people, though some thought the sanctuary would be too large. I still remember a conversation I had with Elder Teal just shortly before he died in 1997. He had remained a member of this church after his retirement, and one day when we were in conversation, he recounted to me how he and other church leaders were criticized by some for building such a large sanctuary. Why are you building such a large church to seat 2,000 people? It's too extravagant. Which seems rather strange with the Burden Hall Church having 4 worship services by this time and 2 adult Sabbath schools, and they still didn't have enough room. Children's Sabbath schools being scattered all over the campus. So Elder Teal deliberately allowed the crowding to become intolerable for the congregation in order to demonstrate the urgency of a decision to build a new church. Dr. Charles Winter, who was the chair of the Department of Microbiology at Loma Linda University, agreed to serve as the chair of the College Church Building Committee, and Dr. M. Webster Prince, dean of the School of Dentistry, agreed to serve as the chair of the fundraising committee. And he, along with the church staff, enthusiastically directed the fundraising efforts to a total of $200,000 of the estimated $500,000 it was estimated would cost to construct. And here's a picture of the fundraising thermometer that was placed on the church sign. This amount, together with generous help from the College of Medical Evangelists, the Southeastern California Conference, Pacific Union Conference, and General Conference, brought the total to $500,000. Now here's an artist rendering, an early rendering of what the church campus was proposed to look like. As you can imagine, the architectural drawings went through several phases before deciding on a final draft. I thought it was kind of interesting to notice that in these early renderings, the campus chapel was attached to the sanctuary on the north side, jutting out into the north lawn, and the educational wing then flowed from that. Isn't that interesting? And here's another rendering that is a little different, but the same idea. And obviously they changed their mind on that. In the final drafts, the chapel moved to another location. The building committee, under the dedicated chairmanship of Dr. Charles Winter, made careful and wise choices in the planning for the future home of the University Church, such as the decision to leave ample room for a future pipe organ, the decision to shorten the sanctuary in order to bring the balcony as close as possible to the platform, and, of course, the decision to plan a 2-phase educational complex to house the Sabbath school departments, which came later. After plans were approved, the groundbreaking ceremony for the new church sanctuary took place on August 1, 1959, and as you can see, the groundbreaking ceremony took place at Vesper time. It was after dark on Sabbath evening. That's Elder Charles Teal on the left, Gottfried Anderson, the president of the college, Fred Schnepper, the president of Pacific Union, and John Schull, the college controller, and Dr. Charles Winter, the building committee chair. And then 700 people attended to witness the groundbreaking ceremony that evening. But even before the new sanctuary was built, the congregation, knowing that children's Sabbath school rooms were the most pressing need of the church, decided to begin the building project by first building the 1-story children's Sabbath school wing containing 10 new Sabbath school rooms. Do you recognize that building? That's the 1-story Sabbath school wing that sits on the north side of the church. Here's a series of pictures that I'm going to just run through real quickly, showing the construction of the new sanctuary. That's the tower, which was the first thing to be built, followed by the face of the church, the front facade of the church. That's a picture taken from the inside looking toward the balcony. That's an interesting, you can't really tell who those people are, but just for interest's sake, the fellow that's standing in the middle there of that picture is Dick Dunbar, who was a medical student here at the time. There's another picture of the inside looking toward the balcony. This is looking toward the chancel platform area. Another one. And here the pews are being installed. Elder Teal told me that at the time that the construction of the church was taking place, a great controversy arose over the pews. Two factions developed in the church. One wanted pews, and the other group wanted theater seating. And I guess the battle raged on for some time, and finally Elder Teal solved the conflict by saying, well, we'll have pews in the main sanctuary, and we'll have theater seating in the two transepts. So that's what they did. And here's a picture of the interior of the church shortly after it was finished. Another one from the front looking back. It took approximately 1 year to build the children's wing and the sanctuary at the cost of $610,000. I included this picture because I thought it was really interesting to see this magnificent new church building built in the middle of an orange grove. And this picture is taken at night, and you can see that there's very little landscaping been done at that time. This next picture is a bad picture, but I wanted to include it. It's so blurry you can hardly read it. But the date that was set for the inauguration of the new church, and a sign was erected on campus to announce this event to the whole community. Sabbath, September 10, 1960, was the date set for the inauguration of the new church. And 1,700 members of the church met at Burden Hall, which had been their home church for 32 years, and they walked together across the campus to their new church home, the college church. And this is the famous march from Burden Hall that we've heard about for many years. And some of you here tonight might have even been a part of that march, and you might even be able to pick your picture out, or some of your family. But that was a famous march, and a lot of people took place in that. Elder Teal describes the day by saying, we had a brief Sabbath school in Burden Hall, and then we prepared to cross over Jordan. He says, I recall we were preceded by the brass choir, the pastoral staff, the 24 elders, more or less, followed by the entire camp of Israel. It was a delightful experience. And the only other picture I could find of the march was this one, showing them actually marching into the sanctuary. It was a high day of worship. The church was packed. The sermon on that inaugural Sabbath was preached by Elder R.R. Figuer, the president of the General Conference. The title of his sermon was Worship is Transcendent Glory, Transcendent Wonder. At last, the college church was all worshiping under one roof at the same time and in the same place. Almost immediately, the sanctuary became the new home of the college, the weekly chapel service of the college, as well as other important college services such as graduation services. Here is one of the early nurses capping services that happened in the early 60s. One of the first major events in the new college church was the large funeral service for one of the pioneers of the Adventist church, Elder W.H. Branson. And if you could see this picture a little more carefully, you could see that's the old King's Herald Quartet standing there singing. A passing parade of famous preachers in the Adventist church came to preach in the new college church pulpit. Here is Elder R.R. Beats preaching in our church soon after it opened. The college church was dedicated on May 27, 1961, and Elder F.D. Nickel, who had been that little 8-year-old boy, too young to join the first congregation back in 1906, but he was chosen to deliver the dedicatory sermon at the new college church. How appropriate. After the College of Medical Evangelists became Loma Linda University in 1961, the college church was officially renamed the Loma Linda University Church. Within 1 year of this time, the service became so crowded that a second worship service was again inaugurated, beginning in October of 1962. About this same time, Phase 2 was put into action to build a Christian education building to house the 900 boys and girls of the University Church who had been scattered abroad in the various rooms around campus during the Sabbath school hour. It was around this time that Elder Paul Huback became the senior pastor. He was here from 1965 to 1969. His special area of interest and emphasis was one of improving organization and intensifying involvement, with more students being involved as elders and deacons. The membership during this time increased from 2,500 to 3,400, in spite of the 1965 swarming that took off 200 members to help strengthen the new Azure Hills Church, which had just begun. And also the completion of the new medical center in 1967 also contributed to this growth spurt. There they are, pouring out of the church on Sabbath. During this time, the ministerial staff was increased from 3 to 6 pastors, including a full-time Bible instructor and a full-time treasurer paid by the conference. In this period of time, the church finished building the Christian education wing. Here's a picture of Pastor Huback and the building committee chair looking over plans for the new educational wing. And as I just showed a moment ago, this is the artist rendering of what the educational wing was to look like, and this is how it actually turned out. We don't always get what the artists make us think we're getting. Here's an artist rendering of what the breezeway would look like, and here's what the actual looks like, a little closer. This new two-story complex was a 33,000 square foot structure. It included 18 new classrooms, bringing the total number of children's Sabbath school rooms to 25. It included new and enlarged rooms for the junior high and high school youth. Here's room 202 for the high school youth. It included a kitchen and a fellowship hall with a fireplace. That's what the fellowship hall looked like when it was first built, with lounging furniture and around the fireplace. It included a chapel that would seat from 250 to 300 people. That's a picture taken from the back looking toward the front of the chapel, and this is one from the front looking toward the back. It's interesting, when Bob Berman came out here from LA, he was the architect that designed the chapel. He designed this as a formal chapel with fixed pews and a very formal look to it, with a long nave, high ceiling. And but by 1971, plans were underway to revamp the chapel because this had become the home of the young adult Sabbath school, and they wanted to have a more informal look. And so they took the pews out and put in movable seating and turned the room around to the side. There's Fred Anderson, many of you remember him, who used to lead the singing to a packed house on Sabbath morning for the young adult Sabbath school. Bernard Brandstater, Doug Willerburn, Bruce Wilcox led out in that Sabbath school. It was quite a place to be on Sabbath morning. But you know, this should be a good lesson to all of us, that we should think carefully about the function of a room or a building and the people that are going to be served in that room before we build it. The only time this room served as a formal chapel was for occasional weddings or funerals, but the majority of the time it had a very open, informal configuration. This second phase, the educational complex, was completed in 1968 at the cost of $350,000. The entire church plant, including the new Christian education wing, cost just over $1 million to construct. It was during this time, the early 60s, that we see the first signs of media ministry at the college church, with the establishment of radio station KEMR-FM. That's Ellis Rogers sitting at the controls. I understand from speaking to Ellis and to Tammy Rubio that the very first radio broadcast of our worship services was as far back as 1951, when it was being broadcast from Burden Hall by what was called carrier current, which is using the actual electric current of the building to transmit the broadcast. And then in 1956, a low-power 25-watt station, KBHR AM, operated on 880 kilohertz. Then we moved into the new church. In 1960, they obtained a license to an FM station, KEMR 88.3, a low-power 13-watt station that covered just the local Loma Linda area, with the 2 live worship services on Sabbath morning. This is the control room that was located in a small closet-sized room in the balcony of the church in the 1960s. This room was very close to where the current broadcast audio studio is located. Ellis told me that Dr. Charles Winter would sit up in this control room on Sabbath morning and teach the Sabbath school lesson live to the Loma Linda radio audience. And this picture here is really very blurry, but it's showing Fred Christensen at the controls, assisted by Bill Hart of the School of Dentistry, and of course Ellis Rogers. I understand also that Glenn Foster was also an active member of the media team in the early days of radio. KEMR served us for 19 years until the university radio station took it over. And it went through several different call letters, KNFT, KSDA, KLLU, and eventually becoming KSGN. And the story of how all that happened is a very long story, so we won't go into that. In 1970, Dr. William Lovelace came to be the senior pastor of the university church. And Bill hadn't been here but just a few days when he had created quite a controversy by removing the pulpit from the front of the church. And it really upset a lot of the church members that the sacred desk, which was a holy piece of furniture, had been removed from the platform. But Bill wanted the pulpit out because he had a more relaxed and open conversational style of preaching. And it was refreshing to many. His emphasis on the relational side of the gospel and his life situation sermons soon made the university church a very popular place to be. For those of you who remember those days, these pictures are very familiar. This tweed jacket that he's wearing is obvious that this was the 70s. With the church plant fairly complete and with the membership growing rapidly, over 4,000 now, Pastor Lovelace's emphasis was on bringing people together in settings where they could talk and listen and work together. Here's a picture of Bill and Edna May visiting with people. Bill's emphasis on the importance of the social, relational aspects of the gospel opened up for many people during this period whole new aspects of what it means to be the church. And so several community building ministries began to be developed. Up until the time when Bill came, fellowship dinner was conducted out on the sidewalk of the Cradle Roll wing of the Sabbath school. But when Bill came here, he said, enough of that. We're going to move fellowship dinner into the fellowship hall. And so he took the furniture out of fellowship hall and put in round tables so that we could have fellowship dinner. And then fellowship dinner teams were organized. Adult education programs, the Heritage Lecture Series, relational Bible study groups, growth groups. Summer camp meetings were started in those years, the church picnics out on the lawn. And it was during this time that in the 1970s, when folk music was really big, the Maranatha Folk Festivals were started out on the church lawn. Gospel musicians from all over the Southern California and different parts of the country would come and sing at these Sabbath afternoon festivals on the church lawn. These events became so large that eventually we had to move them from the north lawn of the church to the quadrangle between the church and the dental school. But those were really big events. Campus Community Fellowship was sponsoring these events. This is one of the few pictures I could find of actual people singing up front, but they have their backs to us. A group called Tranquility were performing. And here's another group. Again, you can tell by the clothing that this was the 70s. That's Steve Ballou, the third from the left. Those of you know him. Anyway, those were exciting times. And it was also during this time that Adventist community team services were begun. The church's outreach to the community with social programs to meet the needs of the hungry and the homeless and the homebound, programs like Meals on Wheels, senior transit, emergency assistance, programs that have had a positive influence in the lives of many in our community. And it was later that Excel tutoring was added to this list, and then the location of Acts was moved to the building that it's in now, along with UReach and our church's outreach department. And also during this time, the Loma Linda Children's Center was begun. This was a joint venture between the church, the University Medical Center community, to provide child care for children of university and medical center employees. For the first 10 years of operation, the Children's Center was operated in the Cradle Roll Sabbath School wing of the church. It was also during this time that the church music department was expanded. Since there was no fine arts program on Loma Linda campus, the church played an important role in providing that missing piece with choral and orchestra and brass and bell ensembles. It's difficult to see in this picture, but on the far right, you can see Bill Lovelace standing up to introduce one of the early Christmas candlelight services. The construction of the Cassavant organ began in the early 70s. And you can see from that large cluster of pipes in the center that you're looking at phase one of the organ. This first phase of the organ was installed in 1972, May of 1972. And you can see there are quite a few of the clusters of pipes that are missing. This organ was designed and built by the Cassavant Organ Company in Quebec and was made specifically to fit in the chancel of the University Church. The first phase had 68 ranks with a total of 3,832 pipes, which constituted roughly 54% of the completed organ. 5 years went by before enough money was raised to begin the second and final phase. In 1976, Pastor Lovelace left us, and in 1977, Pastor Louis Venden came to be the senior pastor. That was also the year that I came to serve on the pastoral staff. Lou and I arrived here the very same week. During our first year on this staff, the final stages of the Cassavant organ were installed. The newly installed organ had 127 ranks with a total of 7,036 pipes. The longest pipes, the 32-foot pipes, reach from floor to ceiling. And interestingly enough, by far the majority of this magnificent instrument can't even be seen because most of it's placed in the large chambers on either side of and above and behind the choir loft, hidden from view by the grill work. The final installation of the Cassavant organ took 3 months to complete at a total cost of $250,000, and the dedication service for the organ was in November of '77. During these years of Pastor Venden's leadership, the music department continued to grow and develop with the increase of vocal and instrumental ensembles. Philip Binkley was our choral director, and Timo Smith came at that time, and Cheryl was the director of the children's choirs. The annual Christmas concert, candlelight concert, became let me back up here a minute. I meant to show this picture earlier. This is a picture of Cheryl Smith directing the junior choir with the orchestra. That's her standing there. And I looked at this picture a little more carefully, and I discovered that was me playing the guitar. Chemo had arranged a song for the junior choir and the orchestra that involved me singing with the choir. Anyway, as I was saying, the annual Christmas concert became, during this time, the largest attended and most anticipated community event of the year. Also, during Elder Vinden's time, the home Bible fellowship groups began to meet. Pastor Vinden's emphasis was on developing and continuing to develop the fellowship and the worship life of the church. Here's a picture of he and Margie circulating among the people on Sabbath morning, fellowshipping together. One of the most successful enterprises during Lou's years was building a close relationship between the sermons preached on Sabbath morning with the home Bible fellowship groups that met throughout the week in homes, in offices, in classrooms. Some of these Bible study groups continued to meet for years, long after the program was discontinued. And this was a picture of one of the combinations of pastoral staff during those years that Lou was here. It was during the same time, the early 80s, that the television ministry began. It first began as a group of volunteers videotaping the worship service to share with sick or homebound members. The venture was soon expanded to channel the services into the medical center and then later to the local cable access channel. I'm sorry I don't have any pictures of our early media television ministry, because I wanted to show you pictures of how much the cameras have changed. But this man on the left, I wanted to show you this picture because the gentleman on the far left, Roland Zimmerman, who just recently passed away, was one of the founding fathers of our television ministry here. And the other three gentlemen there, James Foster, Bert Connell, and Murray Matheson, were all three very faithful members of our media ministries team. As the membership has grown, now past 5,000, we outgrew the Sabbath school facilities. The children's rooms were bursting at the seams. A full-time children's pastor was hired for the first time, and during Elder Vinden's pastorate, the children's ministry became a high priority. In order to free up more usable space for children's Sabbath school rooms, a decision was made in 1986 to move the Children's Center out of the Cradle Roll wing and to build a new Loma Linda Children's Center at another site on the university campus. The university donated the land, the medical center built the building, and the university church operated the center as one of its ministries from 1986 until just a few years ago, when the Children's Center officially became a part of Loma Linda Academy. Around this same time, the mid-1980s, a church master planning committee began its work of developing plans to renovate the church sanctuary and to build a new two-story educational wing to replace the current one-story south wing. Over the next few years, several different plans were proposed for remodeling and building a new south wing. But all of these plans were put on hold as the university church put its full weight behind the campaign to build the new elementary school at Loma Linda Academy. Since the most significant portion of the university church budget goes to Loma Linda Academy, the university church led the way in financing the new elementary school, with our own Jerry Davis leading out in the fundraising campaign. We invested heavily in that project throughout the 80s. The downside to that is that after waging a long and expensive campaign, financial fatigue began to set into the church family in the late 80s, and we were never quite able to regain the momentum to go back and pick up our plans to build the new educational wing or to remodel the sanctuary, even though the long-range planning committee had architectural plans on the table and the church board had given its tacit approval to the direction that we were going. In the meantime, Pastor Venden announced that he was leaving as the senior pastor. This is 1989, and once again, plans are put on hold as we went through another change of leadership. In 1990, Pastor William Lovelace returned to the University Church to be the senior pastor for the second time. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this next thing, but in 1991, shortly after Bill Lovelace returned, the University Church was presented with a proposal by the university for its consideration. The church would swap the land at our present site, 4 acres, for the 13 acres at the Gentry Gym site, which was then located on Stewart Street. The idea was that the university would build the Centennial Complex on this church site, and we would build a new university church on the Gentry Gym site. This proposal was discussed at great length with the university administration and the church board. Studies were done to determine the projected cost for building a new church campus. It was estimated to be $18 million to build a new church plant. The positive aspects of the proposal were that we would have a new church campus, a larger church plant with plenty of parking. The negative aspect was that the church would no longer be in the center of the university and the medical center campus. And this was considered by many to be a big issue philosophically. Many felt strongly that the church, which represents the spiritual life of the institution, should be at the very center of the campus. And that sentiment ultimately carried the day, and the decision was made not to move the church. That, along with the fact that in the early 90s, all of the surrounding institutions were experiencing financial challenges and downturns at that time. Job layoffs were happening at the medical center, and people were feeling very insecure about the future and about money, which gave pause to the church board about the ability of the church to take on such a challenging job financially. So the decision was made that the church would stay put, and as we all know, the Centennial Complex was built on the Gentry Gym site. And so there's no looking back now or second-guessing ourselves. When Pastor Lovelace returned the second time, he came with a new vision and passion, and he challenged the pastoral staff and the church to look beyond our own boundaries and see ourselves as part of a larger church. Although we continued to talk about remodeling and expanding our own church facilities, the church members became excited about reaching out beyond our own borders. And so, with Pastor Lovelace's leadership, we adopted the St. Petersburg, Russia Church as our sister church. And here is Bill. I think I can point to him there. That's him meeting with the members of our St. Petersburg church. They were meeting in an auditorium at that time. And we committed ourselves to help them build a new church building. This became our mission project for the 90s, rather than remodeling our own church. And here is Bill meeting with, there it is. Here is Bill meeting with some of the leaders and the conference and church leadership and with city officials. To Bill's left is Valentina, who was his interpreter. And here's a picture of Bill and John Ruffcorn, who was our business manager at that time, meeting with the city architect. And that's Valentina there in the middle, translating. The city of St. Petersburg donated the land for the church. And so we went with the church architect, the city architect, because we wanted the building to fit in with the architecture of the city. And as many of you know, St. Petersburg is a very historic city with lots of old historic buildings. There's John Ruffcorn. That's not the church. That's John Ruffcorn standing in front of one of the old historic buildings. When we first adopted the Russia project, the General Conference led us to believe that a new church could be built there for 35,000 American dollars, and they said that that would also include the pastor's salary for 1 year. Well, the General Conference was off just a little bit in their calculations, because it wasn't long before 35,000 turned into 150,000. And then we realized that we had taken on a challenging project from which there was no turning back. Before it was over, our members had given more than $630,000 toward the final completion of the St. Petersburg Church. Here is one of the few pictures that I could find of the exterior of the church, thanks to Cheryl Simpson, who provided these next few pictures. That's the exterior, and here's a picture of... This clicker is not working, right? I think the batteries are giving out on me or something. There it is. There's the front of the church. It turned out to be a rather beautiful, unique, light-filled church that seats 750, right in the heart of St. Petersburg. The church was dedicated in 1997. Marking the 100th anniversary of the first Adventist church worker coming to Russia. Quite a few of our church members and pastoral staff and the sanctuary choir went over for the dedication of our sister church, and it was quite a celebration. And it gave our members a feeling of tangible, hands-on involvement in the building up of God's work in that part of the world. Well, moving right along quickly to the next era. In the year 2000, Pastor Lovelace retired, and Pastor Randy Roberts came to be our new senior pastor. By this time, the membership of the church was well over 6,000, and the crowded conditions on Sabbath, both in the Sabbath school area and in the sanctuary, revived discussions once again about renovating and expanding the facilities. Once again, architectural drawings and plans were on the table to build a new multi-story South educational wing that would house the children's Sabbath schools, the high school youth, and the young adult ministries. But before the new wing could be built, the front lobby area of the sanctuary had to be renovated to include new restrooms, because the existing restrooms would be eliminated when the old South wing was demolished. Now, some of you remember this quite well. This is the framing out of the new restrooms. And I won't go into a great detail to tell the whole story here, but I'll just say that due to a series of unfortunate circumstances regarding asbestos removal, building codes, sprinkling systems, electric wiring, etc., it became necessary for us to suddenly, with very little warning, move out of the sanctuary. Almost overnight, we had to vacate the sanctuary. So within a matter of days, we had to say goodbye to our old sanctuary. We had to say goodbye to the old orange pews that we love so much. And within a matter of days, the sanctuary was being dismantled. Pews are going down. The theater seating were coming out of the transepts. And before long, the sanctuary was empty. Within 1 week's time, we had to find a new place to worship. So in September of, this was September of 2003, the university graciously let us move our whole church operation into Gentry Gym, which was sitting vacant at the time. Almost overnight, our media team, led by Pastor Costin Jordash, transformed the Gentry Gym into a beautiful house of worship, complete with all of the media equipment necessary to continue broadcasting our weekly worship services. A lot of work and a lot of hours during that week getting ready for next Sabbath. And there's our trusty pastor leading the way on the crane. Because of the large mobile media production truck that we had recently acquired from the Texas Media Center, our media team was able to begin broadcasting our services immediately. They didn't miss a week of broadcasting the whole 16 months that we were in Gentry Gym. By the spring of 2004, we realized we weren't going to be back in our church sanctuary anytime soon. So we prepared ourselves for the long, hot summer. This thing is just not working. There we go. There's the sanctuary choir. They made the transition with us. The junior choir made the transition with us. There's Randy preaching to us. By the time the summer was over, many were referring to this time at Gentry Gym as our exile into the wilderness. And many of you remember the baptistry you see there in the bottom of the picture. Especially those who were baptized will always remember that experience because of the long distance you had to go from the baptistry to the changing rooms. Meanwhile, across campus, it was becoming clear that what started out to be a cosmetic renovation of the sanctuary had become a major rebuilding of the church. The gutting of the sanctuary right down to the studs. All 7,000 plus pipes of the organ had to be removed. It was a radical rebuilding of the sanctuary, and it was estimated to cost now about $6 million. Since it was clear that we were fast becoming a media church, it was felt strongly by leadership that this was our one and only chance to do it right. So it was decided to design the new sanctuary to be a media worship center with the latest state-of-the-art equipment installed so we could produce the best television programming possible. So there's some of the work that was done putting the clouds in. This was going to require the coming together of many expert minds from several different fields of technology to fast-track the design of the sanctuary and to make it happen quickly. Here's a picture of our staff meeting with consultants from different technological fields from all over the country. Costin brought together this group of consultants. So the plans evolved and the construction schedule lengthened, and the estimated cost of the renovation continued to rise. And in the process, we were still wandering in the wilderness in Gentry Gym a year later. But we could finally see light at the end of the tunnel. By the end of 2004, the project was nearing completion. The estimated cost had risen to $13 million. And there we are with the pews again. Another discussion took place about theater seating versus pews. On Sabbath, let's see. On Sabbath, January 22nd, 2005, the sanctuary of the congregation ceremoniously met one last time at Gentry Gym. Randy preached one last sermon there, and then we marched, after his sermon, we marched from Gentry Gym, much like we did in 1960, from Burden Hall to the newly renovated sanctuary. Well, here we are, going across campus in the second march across campus. There's Randy and Anita with Miranda in the middle, leading the way into the new church, into the lobby. And into our new sanctuary. And here people are finding a seat. Here we are coming in to the new sanctuary, to the sounds of the sanctuary brass. What a day of celebration that was. And thus began a new era of worship at the University Church. What a day of celebration that was. Within 2 years, our church family had paid the $13 million price tag, and we were debt-free. In the decades since, we have moved back into our sanctuary. We have continued to wrestle with the need for more space for all our ministries, as membership and attendance has continued to rise. This, along with our desire to meet the needs of a more diverse congregation and a growing university student population, has led the Long-Range Planning Committee of the church and the Church Building Committee to move ahead with plans for the next phase of our church campus. Here are some pictures of the new design that's being proposed and planned at this very moment. This is the corner of Campus and University Street. looking at the new wing that is being proposed, which is phase 1 of the new building program. Now here's a picture of the entire plant, the proposed plant, a phase 1. I cannot get this thing, I'm not sure where I'm at here. Get my other pointer out here. Whoops. This is phase 1 of the new program, of the new building plan. There's the sanctuary. This is phase 1, and this is phase 2. In phase 1 of the new building, it will provide space for more adult Sabbath school rooms, for new and larger rooms for the junior high and high school youth, for maintenance and media. There will be a new and larger fellowship hall area, which you heard about this morning, that's going to be named the William Lovelace Fellowship Hall. There will be gathering places for university students and for young adults, an outdoor amphitheater for concerts and programs. And in this building program in phase 1, we're not just constructing more buildings, but we are building a new tomorrow for the next generation of our church. And of course, we all know that the university and the medical center are entering into a period of great growth and change with the coming of Vision 2020 and the building of the new medical center. With the coming of this new medical center, it's going to be even more important than ever that the university church remain relevant and ready to meet the needs, the spiritual and social needs of the growing number of people who are going to be populating this campus. I know that most of you have probably seen this artist rendering of the new medical center. I'm not sure if you've noticed what I've noticed. I want to just zoom in here for a minute. You see, what do you see reflected in the glass wall of the new medical center? The university church. I think that's a very significant symbolism that the church, which should represent the heart of God, the loving, compassionate, healing ministry of Jesus, that this church, with its values and its faith, should always be reflected throughout this campus and in all of its institutions. May it always be so. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon.
I want to thank Marvin so much. It is rich to sit and listen to the history of what has happened in this place and what God has done in, with, and through this community. I want to invite the deacons to come forward, if you would, to receive an offering. We're going to take an offering for the benefit of the building program. I'm just going to have you come right down and begin the process. I'm going to talk a bit while you're doing this, and we will pray at the end. As you know, if you have been around this congregation in recent months, in fact, in recent years, we have been moving rather aggressively in the direction of a north wing. The generosity of this congregation has made it not only a possibility and a dream, but a reality that is about to begin. As you know, if you've been here in just about 3.5 months, many things will change. Different rooms will be closed off and then will disappear. The footprint of the north building will appear in the form of construction fences, and we will be off and running. We so much appreciate the generous support that this congregation has made. As I listened to Marvin's story and just thought about the different points in time in this church's life when key decisions were made and key individuals played a role in it, I just felt grateful for all of us that we can be a part of what God is doing here in this place. Really is a privilege. Immediately following the service in the breezeway behind me, there are DVDs available, again, for the benefit of the building program. From the first time that Marvin made this presentation, if you would like to contribute to the building program and you would like to take something with you from your home church that will help tell that story, then you can secure that in the breezeway right behind me. Again, I want to say thank you so much to Marvin. I have loved Marvin's heart for knowing the history of this place and for being detailed and clear in outlining what God has done here. So thank you again. I'd like to invite you to stand, if you would, so that we can finish this evening with prayer. Gracious God, we are so thankful for the clarity of your leading in our past and for the clarity of your presence in our present. We pray, Lord, that growing out of that experience, past and present, will come our hope, our faith, and our confidence in the future. We pray that as we continue to move forward, that the buildings that we inhabit might never hide the fact that the most important reality is the church that inhabits the building, the people, the community of faith that here gathers. Might these buildings become places where children will meet Jesus, where young adults will find a passion for life, where middle-aged adults can support and care for people on both ends of the age spectrum, and where older adults can become mentors in what it means to grow in Christ and serve Him always. So, Lord, bless us to that end. Guide us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and God bless you.